Hey, it's AKAJK, welcome back to another video here on the channel, or if you're new then welcome for the first time. And as I mentioned in my previous video, which was an update video on the channel and whatnot, I would be going through and discussing the Bond films, along with, John Carpenter and other things like that. But this episode is going through Dr. No from 1962, the first film in the James Bond series. I'm going to be going through and discussing, this is a more casual, kind of laid-back approach that I'm taking to this, as opposed to my usual kind of more intensely edited videos that you can also check out on the channel if you're interested in them. So, Dr. No was the first time I'd ever seen a James Bond film. If you're coming here for a more professional or expert outlook on the film, that's certainly not what you're going to be getting here, because I'm by no means an expert. This is my first time watching the film and entering the world of James Bond. Anyways, I'm used to the Kubricks, the Kurosawas, the Ingmar Bergmans, and whatever of the world of cinema. But with Dr. No, I really had a great time with it. I had no idea really what to expect going in. There's obviously so much you hear about James Bond and that whole world of James Bond. You get ideas in your head, but I'd never really heard key plot points about any of the films, which is good. So, I'm going in not really knowing much aside from the reputation that James Bond has and, things like Bond, James Bond, or, Aside from that, I didn't have any plot points, in my head, as many people would with Star Wars and the I am your father scene and whatnot. Things like that are very ingrained in pop culture. Whereas with James Bond, it's not, specific scenes that get mentioned or particular plot points. It's just sort of the esque and the style and the vibe that the films have, which was great for me coming in as a new viewer. Now, just looking at all of the budgets of all the James Bond films, this has a far smaller budget than all of them, obviously being the first one, and it's not, confirmed whether this would catch on, whether people would like it and whatnot. But I really liked the fact that this was made on a lower budget. It had less major action set pieces, which I definitely prefer. From what I've heard in kind of trailers and things that you see, future James Bond films, they get bigger, as you would expect with sequels, larger, bigger, with more action set pieces. And within the action spy genre, you'd assume more explosions, more car chases, etc., etc. I'm glad this wasn't as focused on those aspects of this whole kind of universe. It's a slower paced film, which I really liked. It's more focused on the spy and mystery aspects of the film and James Bond himself. So I guess that reduces my excitement slightly for the films to come. But this also, I really loved watching this film. I had a really great time with it. So it's conflicting, I guess. I am going into the film now with spoilers and whatnot. If you haven't seen Dr. No before, I'd strongly suggest you close this video, go and watch the film, and then come back to this. This video is going to be here, but it's much better to go in without having any plot points known. You don't want any spoilers, so best to watch the film. And if you've never seen any of the James Bond films before, then you can join in the journey with me, and I'll be doing this type of video for each of the James Bond films. And I'll be taking your viewer input, so if you have any discussion points for the next few James Bond films, because by the time you're watching this, I would have probably already recorded the video for From Russia with Love, because at the time of this recording I've seen both Dr. No and From Russia with Love. So it'd be better to give me plot points for things like Goldfinger and future James Bond films. I wouldn't be reading them until I see those films, so I don't get spoiled for them. But feel free to discuss spoilers for the next upcoming films in the comment section down below, which is why I'd urge anyone who hasn't seen the films not to delve in there, because I would like discussion point suggestions. If you don't want to leave them in the comments, you can go to Reddit. Anyways, let's dive into the start of the film with the opening credits sequence. This is, the first time we hear the now extremely iconic James Bond theme. We move into this really odd dance type of scene with shadows of characters dancing. And it was such a bizarre kind of opening, and it really brought to mind David Lynch's Mulholland Drive. That's a superb film, a perfect film if you're interested in checking it out. I'm sure many of you have heard of it and seen it before. Masterpiece, one of the best of all time. And that film came out 2001, long after this film. So I'm, wondering whether Lynch actually took the idea from this, or if this was something, that has been done in previous films. But I haven't seen it elsewhere aside from Lynch's Mulholland Drive, and now obviously in Dr. No. I liked it. I mean, the Mulholland Drive, it's used for a thematic purpose and, to convey a sort of message which you'd understand sort of by the end. And this one, it doesn't seem like it's conveying any message. I didn't even know why it's there, but I liked it. Then we move into the whole Three Blind Mice segment, which is, again, really bizarre and weird. It's something that I wouldn't expect to see in a film like this. It's these three men who, I mean, they are shown to us as being blind at first. Later we learn that they are killers. And, they're sort of walking in a line. There's the song Three Blind Mice playing in the background. And they're on their way to, kidnap Strangways and kill a secretary and whatnot. And it's just such an odd opening. It's really, I liked the uniqueness that it had. Then there is the scene where Strangway's secretary gets killed. And that scene is done really well. You see her, sending messages across, and then I think she says, over and out or something like that at the end, and she closes the transmission, and then she turns around and she sees the three blind mice, surrounding her, whatever room or office or something like that she's in. And she lets out a scream, and there's this really interesting cut. It's the same frame, and she gets shot down. I think they use silences. I can't remember how loud the bang was. I assume it wasn't particularly loud, but anyway. And then you see her drop dead on the floor. It's a really shocking kind of way to start out and introduce us into the world of James Bond. It's adds the whole seriousness to the world. People die here. This isn't just fun and game. A nice and shocking way to grab the audience right from the start, and it certainly did hook me from the beginning. Now, when James Bond is first introduced, he's playing some sort of card game. There's a round table, and that's when we see Sylvia Trench as well for the first time. And that's where we first hear the James Bond line, the now iconic line. And that's where we first hear it. One thing that stands out that I really liked about that segment, that whole Bond introduction scene, was first the way they introduced Bond, which I'll get onto in a moment, but also the look and the colour and the aesthetic that the actual image had, the visual aesthetic, the warmer, more gold look, the filmic look that it had as well. It just gives off this really cool vibe. It's difficult to explain how a visual aesthetic affects someone, but I liked the way it looked. Now, just on the topic of Sylvia Trench, her character is a bit... I mean, I don't want to go as far as to say she's completely useless, but there isn't really a real distinct point for her. There's the idea that Bond is a womanizer, and that's developed, throughout the film. But that's something that could have been compressed instead of building her up from the start as someone of significance. Unless, that was a sort of idea that they had, a notion they had in their mind before actually making the scene or something. But she still doesn't seem like a significant enough character to have this introduction. She's the one that first interacts with James Bond. She has a few other scenes, but she really doesn't develop the plot point. She isn't the Bond girl who's Honey Ryder, who we'll get onto later. But she's the one that's introduced first. And not that Honey Ryder shouldn't have been introduced when she was. I thought that was a really cool and interesting introduction that she has, Honey Ryder, later on in the film. But the fact that, you introduce this character and that she gets pushed to the side is, it's debatable, In terms of the performance, Eunice Gayson portrays Sylvia Trench, nothing particularly special. I will get on in a bit to Sean Connery's performance, which I thought particularly stood out as really great. Now, there's a scene that comes soon after where we first meet M, who is Bond's superior or his boss, so the person that assigns him the missions, certainly above him, in the whatever ranking within MI6. And he's definitely one of my favourite side characters in this whole James Bond universe. We see him a bit more in From Russia with Love as well. There's this really great scene they have that shows off their sort of relationship. That's their discussion about the Beretta. And less so the discussion. The discussion is, Bond has a gun that M and whoever his partner, someone that works for M, his assistant or something, the both of them don't approve of. They say, it's not the right gun for the job, and on your previous mission, you failed using this gun, and yet he got hospitalized for 6 months or something like that. I can't can't recall the exact details, but basically they didn't want him to use this gun because they didn't think it was good enough. And so they wanted to replace it with something else. And so he reluctantly kind of accepts it and moves on. And he's taking this box with him to give, I think it was to Moneypenny or something like that. And he hides the Beretta under it and walks off with it. As the audience, I don't think we see that unless I missed a shot where, he takes the Beretta. But I certainly didn't notice that. So we learn about it from the line that M says, "Bond, leave the Beretta on my desk," or something like that. And that was, a nice way to show off their relationship. While one may be the other's superior, they still have a sort of friendly relationship. And in the next film, there's the discussion about a previous mission they had in Tokyo or something along those lines. And it develops their kind of long-standing relationship, which I liked. But again, don't want to go into detail on From Russia with Love. Then I want to get into the character of Bond, not, specifically Sean Connery's portrayal of him in this film, but just more so the idea of him and the way he's presented. So there's this whole kind of, this classiness to him, this Britishness that he has, and that's developed through, there's the mention of the Savile Row suits that he wears, and because he's asked, I think, about his tailor at some point, and he mentions Savile Row, and just his fashion on the whole, and the Rolex, the Submariner Rolex or something like that he wears. So the fashion, the suits, the watch, and all of that, and also the character's knowledge of fine wines and things like that. That's, it's a few kind of throwaway lines that they have in the film. The interaction towards the end with Dr. No, and he's about to smash a wine bottle on someone's head or something like that. And Dr. No says, "Careful, that's 65. And he says, "I prefer the 63 or something like that. While that is also a rebuttal to his kind of point and whether he knows about the wine or not, he still displays that knowledge, and that's developed throughout the film. And that whole kind of classiness that he has, that's ingrained within him, is something that I really like about the character. And that seeps into the whole Bond culture thing, because, there's a whole fandom around him and people wear, the suits that he wears. And there's a sort of similar thing with Kingsman recently, which is, like a sort of inspired by James Bond, certainly much worse. Not a fan of them at all. But none of them are particularly good filmmaking-wise. No really great performances. Nothing really stand out. They're pretty, pretty mediocre, at least for the first one. The second one's really bad. And, can go into that on a separate video. But it's just that whole culture of suits and classy watches and knowledge of, fine wines and the charisma and the accent and everything that's ingrained within Bond is something that's, I really liked about the character. And then there's, of course, the actual performance by Sean Connery, obviously in this film and in the future films within the Sean Connery canon, or whatever, his tenure within the world of James Bond and within the films. And his performances are really great in this one and From Russia with Love, and I'm sure with the other ones. First of all, the accent, I can't really put my finger on it, but it really works well, and his delivery of certain lines is elevated because of his accent. But then there's the contrast between the kind of tough and ruggedness that Sean Connery has, just as a person and the way he looks, and he seems tough and whatnot, and then that contrast with the classiness that we just mentioned. And that's an aspect that I really like, the contrast between his rugged demeanor and the classiness of the character with all the suits and whatnot. It's like a reflection of the relationship between Terence Young and Sean Connery, and they come together perfectly in this film. And they sort of add to each other and create this single character that's a blend of the two people, and it's really done well. Then there's everything that I mentioned with the James Bond line, the shaken not stirred and all that stuff. Any time someone does a similar thing, even switch around the names, the last name and then their full name, it instantly brings to mind James Bond, whether or not you've seen the films. And that's always a topic that I bring up when I discuss the good, the bad, and the ugly in reviews and whatnot. Maybe I'll do an in-depth discussion here. That's one of my all-time favorite films. And that's a film where Ennio Morricone recently passed away, sadly. Probably my favorite composer of all time. He did one of the most iconic scores of all time for The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. And that's a score that certainly, whether or not you've seen the films, you'll know the score. When you look at a kind of a desert landscape, and you see something that looks like a western frontier or something that you see in a spaghetti western or a western film, instantly that tune would play in your head. No doubt about it. I mean, it's been spoofed and done so many times, and that's the same idea with Bond, James Bond. I'd say that Good, the Bad, and the Ugly score is far more iconic. But, it's this whole same idea, and the way it's caught on now, it's something, nearly 6 decades into the future, with the series still continuing and this world, still being alive. And this was the start of everything. Then if we, have a deeper dive on the Bond character, I mean, there isn't too much nuance to the character. He's not, Michael Corleone in The Godfather or, something along those lines. Or, Jack Nicholson's Jack Torrance in The Shining or whatever. He's not. This isn't a sort of nuanced, fully developed character. I mean, the film isn't in any way a character study. We're not looking at Alex from A Clockwork Orange or something like that. He's just, he's a character. He's obviously not an everyday man, No one can go around and, do what he does and whatnot. In the regular population or whatnot, you're not going to find a James Bond in every household. But he still has things that, he expresses fear and anxiety throughout the film. Maybe on a lesser degree than we'd expect, from a real person in his position. But it's still, nonetheless, I can appreciate it. So things like the spider scene where he's asleep and, what's his name, Professor Dent, I believe his name is. He's given the spider by Dr. No in a previous scene where Dr. No's kind of getting angry at him. And he goes and puts it, in the night on Bond's bed. And, Bond wakes up and he sees the spider crawling on his chest or on his arm or something. And he waits for it to crawl onto the pillow. So, obviously if he makes any sudden movements, he'll die because he'll get pierced and poisoned and whatnot. And so he's waiting for the spider to crawl off him. And once that happens, he jumps off the bed. And there's the scene where the music is synchronized to his hits because he grabs some sort of item, and bashes the spider in 5, 6, 7 times. And there's the dun dun dun, in the music. I don't know, replicate. I'm not going to replicate it well. Probably play the scene or something like that. First of all, we clearly see that he's terrified here, and the excess kind of lengths that he goes to destroy the spider. He really wants to make sure that it's dead because he's so scared. And also the other aspect is just the way it's done and the way they're synchronized together in the edit with the music. And it's just something that I really liked and it stood out to me. It heightens the suspense and the tension and everything with a big climax. Because, the whole spider scene is done in quite a great manner with suspense and tension that builds up. And that's sort of the easing of that, or the loosening off, or the drop, the climax, or whatever the hell you want to say. Another scene is with Honey when they're walking together and they're holding hands or something like that. And Honey comments on the fact that his hands are sweating, and then he's like, yeah, I'm scared or something like that. That furthers his anxiety, and he isn't someone who's not scared of anything and can do everything. He's not a complete superhero or something like that. Now, in terms of other moments where Bond is put to the test, and he's either nearly killed or something bad nearly happens to him, there is the great scene that's sort of like the car chase, or someone's tailing him when he leaves the airport, I think, when he's landed. And there's also the photographer. I can't remember her name. But anyways, he knows that the driver that he's with is in fact against him or something like that. He's put to the test there. And then there's the sort of fight scene they have, quite a brief one, which I liked. Again, they're not going above and beyond in complete excess with their action and whatnot. It's kept to what's required and what develops the film. And also, there's a particular point of importance within that scene is the introduction of the cigarette with the cyanide inside of it, which whatever the driver, whatever his name was, uses to kill himself. He asks Bond if he can take out a cigarette, and he takes it out, and that's the end of him. And that's maybe sort of the introduction of the gadgets within the Bond world, which are much more prevalent in From Russia with Love. There's the whole suitcase full of all sorts of knickknacks. But in here, that was, I don't know, it looked to me that Bond was he was shocked first that he killed himself with the cyanide, and maybe that got through him and he didn't realize that could happen. But also the fact that this is such a nifty kind of thing to do. You know, you hand someone a cigarette and they're gone, they're dead. Along the lines of poisoning them or something like that. And there's a sense of kind of admiration, or, you know, he's as if a kid is looking at something, he's like, oh, cool. That's the kind of look that Sean Connery gives in that scene. If that's just me, you can let me know in the comment section. But that development of the Bond gadget thing is, I guess it really starts there. Obviously, it's not a tech gadget, but it's a sort of nifty thing, a hidden spy type of thing. There's also the scene with Quarrel and Pussfella when Quarrel sends Bond into the room and they're going to discuss something in private, and then Bond pulls a gun on Quarrel or something like that, and then Pussfella comes out the back and he's going to attack him, and there's a knife on one side and whatever. That's another scene where he's put to the test, and you can see with his facial expressions that he's not like, I'm cool, everything's going to be alright. You can genuinely see the fear and anxiety within him. It's not like he's terrified, maybe as if, you know, but you can still see it. Now, speaking of Quarrel, I'd like to transition into an issue that's quite prevalent in this film, and that's sort of stereotyping and racist depictions of characters and certain races and whatnot. The relationship between Quarrel and Bond is really kind of an uncomfortable one to watch, with Bond sort of barking orders at him, get me this, Quarrel, come here, do this for me, do that, and Bond never really respects him despite the extreme efforts that Quarrel goes to help him out and whatnot. And that relationship is, yeah. There's also the fact that he calls him Captain, and I think he says Mister and things like that, and Bond just calls him Quarrel. There's no reason, you know, inherently for Quarrel to call Bond Captain or Mister, because, you know, it's not like Bond and M, where M is his superior within the company rank, within MI6's ranking and whatnot, and he assigns the jobs. Quarrel is just someone that helps them out. You know, the relationship should be more sided to them being grateful to Quarrel for offering them help, as opposed to them kind of taking charge over Quarrel, which is how it is here. And in a bit of a worse manner, it gets a bit uncomfortable in certain scenes to watch. I mean, it's not completely overt and right in your face, but it's still definitely there. There's also the every character in this film that's, you know, is a worker of sorts, you know, that, you know, some sort of labor type of job, you know, something like that, where you'd expect, you know, less wages, lower wages and things like that, a worker, as opposed to someone in the position of James Bond, who's a detective. All of the worker kind of characters are played by either those people of Asian descent or mixed race, or the Jamaican people. Just, if you didn't know Quarrel was Jamaican, that's where they fly to in the film. I'm assuming you've seen it, because we're this far into the video and whatnot. But that was also something that was really prevalent to me. You know, I was watching, and all of the workers, you know, Asian descent or Jamaican or whatnot, and it was, you know, a bit. And then there's a scene where Dr. No and Bond meet, you know, at the end of the dinner, which I mentioned earlier. And Dr. No describes himself as being, you know, half, you know, of Asian descent and then half British or something like that. The fact, and I'm fairly sure that the actor that portrays Dr. No is not at all of Asian descent. Him playing, you know, a character from there, it seems a little problematic, you know. But what is good is that they didn't use the stereotypical accents that they would use, you know, you see in maybe even older films, which are much more offensive and much more overt in their kind of racist stereotypical depictions. In here it was a little more tame and less overt than that, but it's still an issue that I'd like to bring up. And another issue with this film is the constant objectification of women throughout the film. I think every female character, aside from a couple of minor ones, I'm going to get the point across, they're nearly all sexual objects in this film. There is the photographer, who, there's some sort of, you know, we can discuss, you know, race-related issues there as well. But I don't want to spend too much time on this because, you know, there's other aspects I want to discuss, but there's that. She's very, you know, I guess a minor character. And then at first, the first female character we're introduced to is killed off, you know, instantly. But, the rest throughout are all sort of sexual objects. I guess you can see where the problematic nature of that stems. And from there I transition into Honey Ryder, who I'm a little conflicted on. First of all, the character is, I don't know, I wouldn't go as far as to say completely boring, but I wasn't particularly interested in the character. But I like the introduction. She sort of comes out of nowhere, and we're about 60% into the film, and the Bond girl of the film is introduced, and she just sort of comes out of the ocean, basically. And it's a kind of a shocking introduction. Not shocking in a manner that's going to blow me out of my seat or something, but it's unexpected, I guess, is a better way to put it. There's another interesting scene which I like involving Honey, where she talks about her past and, where she's lived before. And there's a mention of this scene, of this, part of her life where she was living in the landlord. There's, implied that he raped her, or there was some sort of sexual assault there. And she says that she put a spider in his bed or something like that, took him a week to die. Did I do wrong? It was, an interesting way, because she's not as a completely helpless character. Though I don't really understand her instant connection to Bond. They spend a couple of hours together, and then she's kind of holding on to him later in fear of her life or something like that, when they're in the lift in one of the scenes in Dr. No's big building. But that was an interesting scene. But aside from that, she's quite a boring character. Doesn't have much to her. But she isn't written with particular depth. Whereas Bond, who isn't, a nuanced, deep character, as I've touched upon before, still has something more to him. And so do other characters like M and Professor Dent and whatnot. Apologies for the lighting change of sorts. Hopefully it's not too jarring. I just had to switch out, battery died and whatnot. So just jumping back into the discussion, I want to go back in the timeline of the film to one of my favourite segments, probably the standout segment in my eyes of this film. It's my favourite one, at least. And that's when Dent actually comes in to kill Bond. So Bond's staying at this woman's place. They were going to go out for dinner, and he tricks her and has her taken away in a car. He knows that she's a villain or whatever, working with the opposition, and has her taken away. And she had someone, called in to come and assassinate him or kill him or whatever. He was meant to be killed before arriving in the house, because she called him and said, I'd like to meet you at this time. He was meant to be killed on the road. There was this car chase that they had. Also, during that car chase sequence, they played a tune, which I'll get onto, but I didn't like that specific placement of it, but I'll get onto the music a bit later on. Anyways, he was meant to be killed by whoever was tailing him in that particular moment. And Bond actually managed to get away, and the opposition's car was destroyed and whatnot. She wasn't expecting it, so she was, obviously shocked when he came in. So she had someone called in to come and kill him, and that was Professor Dent. And so Bond sets up the bed, and he puts like kind of a fake, shape of his body and covers it up. The age-old trick. And he sits next to the door, on the right of the door, and starts playing, solitaire with cards or whatever on a nearby coffee table, something like that, waiting for Dent to arrive, or whoever it's meant to be. And lo and behold, Dent does arrive eventually, and he's got his gun ready. He adds the silencer attachment, don't know the proper term, and Dent comes in and he shoots the fake body on the bed. And numerous shots, get shot, and I'll get onto that point in a moment about why there were so many shots I think were shot. Why so many bullets were shot, better way of saying it. So Dent fires all those shots, so Bond pulls the gun on Dent and tells him to throw away his gun. And they have a sort of brief discussion, and Dent's pulling his gun, closer to him with his foot. And it seems that, Bond's noticed that he's doing this. And Dent pulls up the gun and he tries to shoot him, and then there's the really great, really cool, badass line that Bond delivers, and it's that's a Smith & Wesson, and you've had your 6. I'm not going to attempt to try and imitate his voice. I'll probably play a clip here. Just I can't do it, but that's a Smith & Wesson. That's a Smith & Wesson. You've had your 6.
It's a Smith & Wesson, and you've had your 6.
That's a brilliant way of delivering exposition, because why the gun didn't shoot or something, what was the issue, whether it was, in The Great Silence by Sergio Corbucci, where the sheriff's gun got too cold because he didn't know that he's meant to keep it warm during, whatever icy period, and he's not able to use it or something like that. the way they explain that to the audience is in that cool line there, why the gun didn't shoot. That's the Smith & Wesson. So it's the type of gun is referenced, and that's, we're not all experts on, firearms and guns and whatnot, so that's already pointing something out to the audience. And you've had your 6. It's typically, a gun has 6 bullets. It's, a fact that most of us are aware of. And, just pointing it out, it's a brilliant way of delivering the exposition and explaining to us why the gun didn't work and didn't shoot. And it's also really cool, one of the coolest lines that I've seen, in recent cinema history. Well, recently that I've seen. It's nearly 6 decades old. It's not, I wouldn't call it an ancient or old film per se, but I wouldn't say it's recent. But that's a different discussion. But anyways, it's just a really damn cool line. And it works well as exposition, and then, we move on to the next scene, and that line really sticks. It's kind of, a lot of people have described it as the birth of James Bond, and, I can see that being the case with that line. Or, everyone, is like, I've seen a lot of people saying, I became a fan from that line. That's a Smith & Wesson, and you've had your 6. And the scene is just structured so well, and the tension and the suspense, and it's exciting. And it's not the case wherein, Daisuke Beppu has done a discussion on this film. I've seen part of it. And he mentions that in the future films, which is what I've heard, with them having bigger action set pieces and whatnot. Also, check out Daisuke Beppu's channel, one of, if not the greatest film-related channels here on YouTube, discussing the Criterion Collection and other things like that. And he points out that, in the future films, there likely would have been a fight between the two, and, it lasted several minutes, and then, someone would have died. And that probably would have, eliminated the possibility of having that really cool line in there. That just would have been far worse, and I'm so glad that, this film kept its kind of more tame attitude, and we got to have that scene in that line. Now, it's Anthony Dawson who actually plays Professor Dent in this film. I've only ever seen him in Hitchcock's Dial for Murder, but I wanted to use that as a transition to suggest, some inspiration that this film seems to have clearly taken from Hitchcock. It feels Hitchcockian in many places. Obviously, Hitchcock is one of the greatest filmmakers of all time, one of my personal favorites. And Dial for Murder is, one where there's a lot of dialogue that's used to build up suspense. A lot of hidden intentions are explored in the dialogue and, given in the dialogue. And in this speech that the characters are given and whatever they're talking. And these moments of discussion the characters have is where intentions are given. And that seems to be the case in a number of these discussions throughout the film, which I really like. And also the suspense elements and the thriller elements that the film has seem to be clearly inspired in many ways by Hitchcock, which is, it's nice to see. It's not like a completely derivative or like a copy of a Hitchcock film, but it certainly takes aspects. Now, I have not yet seen North by Northwest. That's one of the key Hitchcock films that I'm missing out on my, cinema knowledge or whatever the hell. But I've seen some scenes from it, and in the next film, there's a scene where a helicopter kind of dives down over Bond, and that seems similar to a scene that I recall from North by Northwest, at least from a trailer that I've seen, with the plane, hunting Cary Grant's character around. So that's just further kind of things that they've taken from Hitchcock. Now, I previously mentioned the Three Blind Mice music, that song that played in the beginning. Now, I just want to quickly transition onto the music in the James Bond films. Of course, classic theme that I mentioned as well earlier on, which, I liked and all. It wasn't my favorite part. What I really preferred was the more specific theme. I'm going to play it in the background now, where Bond was coming up to the woman's house, was where I think it was used incorrectly. Aside from that, it's a really cool tune, and it plays at all the perfect moments, really used well, and it's a great piece of music. And something I haven't really mentioned is how they built up the villain, Dr. No, in this film. He doesn't appear until near the very end of this film, and he's built up superbly throughout the film. You don't see him at all. You hear him talking, a few times. He threatens Professor Dent, tells him to take the spider to put, on Bond's bed or whatever. That fear is ingrained within the audience through the way people describe him and the people's reactions to him. And when I said the Professor Dent firing all 6 shots from his Smith & Wesson, all 6 shots from his gun when he comes in to kill Bond, maybe it's because he's, so terrified of Dr. No and what he'd do if he actually fails to kill Bond. And he'll go to these extreme lengths to ensure that Bond is eliminated because, he's really afraid. And that really accentuates everything surrounding Dr. No. There's also the build-up of Crab Key, the island, and the dragon that's in it, and that tank that we see in the island when we get onto there. I haven't really mentioned the island a lot. It's not the most interesting aspect of the film. It's still entertaining and all. But you see this sort of tank that's meant to be the dragon, and its tracks are creating the sort of dragon marks and footprints and whatever. And it just blows out fire. Like, they've sort of a massive flamethrower of sorts, and they've painted it and whatnot. It's really menacing when we actually see it on screen. I haven't seen something like that, at least to my memory, in a film. Then we move into the big building with, Dr. No's whole headquarters or whatever it is on Crab Key. And there's like a slow build-up of suspense and tension where they, go through all of these sort of safety precautions, because, it's a place with, radiation and missiles and whatnot. They have to be cleaned and washed and everything. And there's a slow build-up of tension until the scene where they drink the coffee, and the coffee turns out to be drugged and they fall asleep or whatever. And then the tension drops, and then it rises again when they're kind of told to come to dinner with Dr. No, and they go on the lift and whatever. And tension builds until you finally meet Dr. No for the first time. And he really doesn't disappoint. He looks, like a good villain. And there's the discussion at the dinner table, which I mentioned, briefly earlier. Then really going into the end, there is the scene where, Bond's been put in this cell, and he gets out and crawls through the vents and whatever, and enters the room where Dr. No is, on some sort of computer testing the missile outside, and you see everyone in the safety suits walking around, and Bond, kills someone. It's interesting that he kills people in this film. Not a perfect kind of moral character, if you will, which is more interesting. But anyways, he kills this guy and takes his suit, and he goes in and he pretends to be one of the workers, wearing the safety suits and doing everything. There's a scene which I feel like now you'd expect, where he was asked to perform a task that the original person would have done, and he wouldn't know how to do it or whatever. And he goes in and he turns the dial and everything goes haywire, and that's where he finally kills Dr. No. That was a great scene. The alarms blaring in the background, heightening everything. I really loved that segment of the film. He goes and saves Honey after that. Then you have a calmer kind of outing as they sail off, as they're on the small boat, him and Honey, and they're sailing off, and then the film ends. I didn't particularly love that ending kind of scene. I liked the final segment in From Russia with Love much more than this. But everything before that was great. It doesn't really let the film down. It's not a major thing. That's sort of all the big things I wanted to discuss with the film. It's a film that I'm really glad to have finally seen. I really enjoyed watching this. In terms of a rating of sorts, I'll give you mine. But it does change, over time, as with all my ratings tend to do. You can check out whatever the updated rating is on my Letterboxd account, where I rate and review films. I write long reviews for all the films that I watch. Letterboxd.com/AKAJK, or you can just type in AKAJK if you use Letterboxd, and you'll find my up-to-date rating. Right now I've got it at a 9 out of 10 and 92 sort of percent. So I usually rate percentages are out of 100 to get more precise which is a better 9 out of 10 or whatever. In this case, it's around that mark. I really did love it. It was an excellent film. I had a great time with it. I don't really want to continue too much. It's been a pretty long discussion so far. And if you did enjoy watching this, and hopefully you'll leave a like, and you can continue watching this series of videos. Hopefully you'll stick around on the channel for all sorts of videos that I have going on. You can subscribe and turn on notifications if you're interested in my channel and the content that I have. And as I said, discussion points for the future Bond films, let me know in the comment section down below. Yeah, I'm excited to continue discussing these Bond films and continue watching them. So Goldfinger for me is next to watch, but the next review or discussion will be of From Russia with Love. So I'm excited to make that video and watch future films. I hope you'll be there too. That's about it.